All right, this is going to be a long format video, which viewers seem to like, which kind of surprised me. But basically, I'm just going to fix this thing from start to finish with no editing and no camera cuts, anything like that. So you might see a mistake or two or drop tool. But I kind of like filming this way because it kind of is realistic and authentic. Whereas sometimes when you see something on YouTube, they show you 3 easy steps and they don't show you the mistakes they made. And if I make a mistake, as someone who's fixed, I don't know, 500 small engines, then maybe you'll make a mistake as someone who's fixed less than 500. So anyway, customer brought me this in the neighborhood. They basically said it sat for a long time, at least 6 months, and now it won't run, which is a super common complaint on generators because people buy them and then basically don't use them until there's a electricity outage, and you never know how long that is. And so the fuel goes bad. I tell people that fuel is kind of like fruits and vegetables. It goes bad. So the best thing you can do is use fuel stabilizer or run the machine every 3 months for 5 to 10 minutes, and then keep fresh and keep a full tank of fresh fuel. Anyway, so here's what we'll do. We'll take a look at what it's doing. So we'll turn that on. I'm just, you can see what kind of machine this is, so I won't do all of that. So then we'll turn this on, and then I already know that it won't start, but just for kicks, we'll pull it anyway. And we'll throw the choke on. Okay, so you can hear the thump, 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 thump. That's a good sign. It sounds like it has compression. So that's good. We'll take off the... This is like, even if you don't have this machine, lots of generators look just like this. So yeah, open the choke. You can take some carburetor cleaner or starting fluid, or you can use gasoline in a little bottle. I would not use brake cleaner. And just do a quick skirt in here, like 1 second. That's all you need. Then give it a pull. Okay, that's a super common situation where basically it won't start, a little bit of fuel, it starts. And what that does is that confirms for you that it is not a mechanical issue with the engine, such as low compression or bad valves or something like that. It also tells you that the ignition system is working properly. So that means spark plug, ignition coil, on switch, all those kinds of things. So basically, we already know that it's fuel related, which we almost already knew already because of the complaint, the symptom that it had not run in a long time. And so now we can get working on it. Now, I will say, sometimes the little bit of fuel in the carburetor has gone bad, but the larger amount of fuel in the fuel tank has not gone bad. And so you can actually just do that trick 2 or 3 times, and the quote unquote bad fuel in the carburetor wasn't enough to get it started, but it is enough to keep it running. And then you can just do that and let it run for an hour or something like that, and it'll kind of clear itself up. It depends on how bad the carburetor is. It depends on how bad the fuel has gone. But that does work sometimes, and so it's kind of sometimes the easiest fix. So basically what we want to do is get this carburetor off. Now, it may be tempting to just like remove the bowl and clean it out, but 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, just taking the bowl off really isn't enough. So I'd recommend doing more than that. So I'm out of shot here. I'm going to take this apart. So these are all 10s. Oh no, 8s. This is a handy little tool. It keeps you from losing your socket in a situation like this. So we'll take off these. Okay. So in this case, you got 6 8mm screws. Now this piece comes off. Let's throw those in there. Now we have, I think these are 10s. Yeah. Now we have some 10s here. And can't quite get on that one. Get an extension. I was kind of skeptical that people wanted to, oh yeah, you can remove this too. This is the breather from the crankcase to the intake. We'll put that back later. I was kind of skeptical that people wanted these kinds of videos, but they've gotten pretty good views. So I guess people like them. And And so if they like them, I'll make them. All right. Then there is one more on the back of this here. There's one more that you have to get to. It's also a 10, and you're going to need a wrench. If you don't own a set of wrenches, I'd recommend buying some from Gear Wrench. I really like Gear Wrench. These are almost 20 years old, and I like the ones that have the ratcheting. Because these are old, they actually aren't as good as the ones that are available now. This one is just reversible. They make one with a switch. There's pros and cons. One of the problems with the reversible like this is you can loosen something and you can get the wrench trapped between like a bolt and the edge of a car or something like that. So the switch ones are kind of nice for that. The downside with the switch ones is that sometimes the switch gets hit while you're working, and that can be super annoying. All right. So this is kind of an annoying design. It has like a little plate that makes it hard to get the wrench on there. I'll show you what I don't like about it here in a moment. Okay, and you can remove this little tube. So basically this bracket here, you can see it's kind of U-shaped, and so it's you can't really get to the nut from above. You got to get it from the side. You could also remove it there, but that's probably more difficult. Okay, so there's our carburetor. We can turn off the fuel valve now over here so that we don't lose too much fuel. There's a special pair of pliers that I've owned for almost 20 years, which are pretty handy. I bought them off the Matco truck years ago. They're basically these flat pliers that are used to pinch hoses so that fluid can't flow through the hose. I got this set from Craftsman. You can see they're identical. So sometimes the Matco guy is selling you something that you could buy elsewhere for a lot cheaper. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. All right, so let's get these two hoses off. I'm not trying to make money off of my recommendations on tools, but there are tools I found over the years that are really nice, and not everyone knows about them. It's another one. This is called Wera, W-E-R-A, and this is what they call like a bit ratchet. So it's just a little ratchet that accepts bits, and that can be really handy for getting into super tight spots. This one is not that tight of a spot, but I had it handy, so I'll grab it. And I'm not in like super hardcore rushing production mode here. I'm just kind of leisurely hanging out today. So if you think I work slow, maybe you're right today. I can really crank these things out, but I'm not really doing this for the money so much, and kind of just takes the fun out of it when you get into hardcore production mode. This gasket's coming off, so just take him off. He really only goes on one way. So when it comes to getting these hoses off without damaging them, pulling often doesn't work because it kind of does like the Chinese finger trap type of pinching. So you kind of want to just pry and wiggle. Twisting is good. Okay, so we're going to lose some fuel out of here when we do this, but that's okay. If you have tough fingers, you can just pinch. If not, you can use some pliers and you pull that guy off. A little bit of fuel coming out, not a big deal. All right, so the carburetor is getting more and more loose. Next, what you want to do, I'll try and zoom in here a little bit more. Next thing you want to do is remove this. This one's pretty easy. You turn this all the way this way, and then as you pull the carburetor this way, the angle becomes such that you can pull this guy out. You probably can't pull him out here because he's captured by this little piece, but as you pull the carburetor out, then it comes easily out, and then you get this little spring-loaded guy. Okay, so now the carburetor is almost totally free. The last thing, well, actually, I take that back. It's free to come off. Let me zoom back out. Okay, the last thing is this thing at the bottom. Now, sometimes you can just disconnect this electrically. But in this case, the electrical connection is kind of far away, so I'm actually going to remove it. It's a couple of Allens. Sometimes they switch around the fasteners on you, basically because they don't want you working on it. Like a mechanic is going to have some Allens, but maybe a normal homeowner who is not a mechanic or something like that, he would be intimidated by the fact that, you know, there's 8mm and then 10mm and then Allen, and then, you know, you just kind of give up. And my experience has been that they do that on purpose. So this is a 4mm hex or Allen. And one thing you always want to pay attention on, this one's pretty easy, but you want to pay attention to, like, this thing is reversible, so which way does the electrical connector go off? In this case, it's pretty obvious and easy, but in other cases, it can be critical, and like the routing of cables can get you in trouble if you get it wrong, so something to keep in mind. All right, this we're going to remove now, and this is our first piece of evidence that there's a problem in the carburetor, all that gunk. Now, what this guy does, this is called a solenoid valve, which means we use power and ground from a wire to energize an electromagnet. You probably can't tell, but this is already a little bit magnetized here. And that electromagnet pulls this little guy down. And if this little valve is not pulled down, yeah, you can see it moving here. If this little thing is not pulled down, then it won't start. And what it wants to do, the purpose of this thing is it wants to control fuel flow to the carburetor so that if you have low oil or something like that, it won't allow fuel to go into the carburetor. Then the customer would complain, my engine doesn't start. But what they've done is they've protected the engine from running with low oil. So yeah, this thing normally is spring-loaded up, which this one is not spring-loaded up, interestingly. Spring-loaded up and then pulled down when it's time to start. So we'll take a look at this later and clean this up, but let's get into the carburetor now. We'll just dump the rest of this out. And I said no camera cuts, but I'm going to do one camera cut because I'm going to hang my tripod from the ceiling so you get a nice view. All right, we're back. So this is the carburetor. You have the throttle, you have the choke, you have the breather, you have the fuel inlet, and then down here you have the bowl. So to get the bowl off, we're going to remove this nut. If you've never owned a pair of these Knipex wrench pliers, they are awesome. These I bought on the Matco truck. You can see that right there, when I was 17 years old. I regret buying it from Matco because they were more expensive than they needed to be, but I don't regret owning the pliers because they're really great. I'm making a mess here on my bench. So again, further evidence that there's a bunch of junk in there. Most of the time you can save these gaskets. Just take your time, wiggle it back and forth. It'll let go and you won't tear it. Come on. Okay, yep, so that's what we expected to see. So just because this has happened inside the carburetor doesn't mean all the fuel in the fuel tank is bad, because what can happen, or what does happen, is a small volume of fuel, let's say 2 ounces of fuel, will go bad quicker than 2 gallons of fuel. And so it has to do with oxidation, and basically it has to do with certain parts of the fuel begin to evaporate away and leave behind residue. If that residue can dilute itself into a larger volume of solvent like gasoline, then it doesn't harm anything. But if it can, it begins to solidify and collect. So, all right, we'll remove this post. That's what keeps the float pivoting. Remove the float and the fuel inlet needle. That'll need to be cleaned. And then down in here, there's a jet. Now that jet is made out of brass. And the problem with that is that when you go to try and get it out, it can you can ruin the brass insert. Now a lot of times a screwdriver like this won't fit in there because you start off at, let's say, well, I'll just show you. How would I just do that? So you start off at 5.5, but then it actually gets thicker. And so it won't, most of the time, it won't go all the way down in there. If it does, it's great. The other thing is nicer screwdrivers have a better point, whereas cheaper screwdrivers don't. So this one is a cheap screwdriver, but I ground this part away so that it will go down into here. So you want to use basically the biggest screwdriver that will fit into the slots down there. And you really want to be careful when you do this, because the steel screwdriver can ruin the slots on the jet easily. Now I actually loosened and then tightened again. Sometimes that can be a good technique, because you can kind of move whatever material is in between the threads kind of back and forth. So just work it slow, back and forth if you have to. This one came out okay. And just give it a tap till it comes out. And basically the jet is a small hole in here, which I'll show you in a minute. But these is what you have to twist against, and it's just really easy for your screwdriver to cam out and damage those the slot, and then it becomes increasingly hard to get out. So, okay. So, and this one has an emulsification tube, which also should come out, and you can kind of see it down there, the gold thing. And what you can do is you can basically just pry. The best thing to use is a plastic tool. I'll show you that in a moment. Hey, how's it going? I thought you were my daughter. I turned soft. I promise no edits, but the neighbor needed to borrow something. All right, so basically you reach in there and you push down, and it doesn't come out because it's kind of sticky. There it is. Now you can push down. You don't have to have a plastic tool. I mean, you can use a screwdriver. You just want to be a little bit careful you don't mess this up. So this is called an emulsification tube. He's not plugged up, but these little holes need to be cleaned. All right, so the next thing we got to do is get this little guy out. There's a little jet in there. And to get this thing out, you got to take this thing out. But this thing is not bottomed out. This is actually your idle adjustment screw. So you can see how the throttle rests against that. And you want to take him back to the position he was in originally. So what I do is I take a screwdriver that has some sort of label or marking, in this case, this label, and I face it up. And then I begin to tighten the screw until it bottoms out. And you don't want to reef on it when it does bottom out. And I count the turns. So we'll do that together. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's about 4 1/4. So you might want to write that down. In my case, I have a video recording. If I forget 4 1/4, most of the time I just remember. So once you know how many turns it takes to bottom it out, then you can replicate its position later. So then you can take it out. All right, then you got to pry this little guy out. And he's, well, yeah, super easy in this case. Oh, this is just a spacer. Okay, he comes out. This is the thing you normally have to pry. Sometimes they're one piece, sometimes they're not. So, okay. And there's actually a tiny little hole in there. It looks actually like it's not plugged up. That's your idle jet. So this is your main jet. This is your idle jet. And this is normally the problem if you have a surging problem where it goes like rrr. Okay, so now the carburetor is stripped as far as it needs to be. Doesn't need to be any further stripped than this, although there are things that could come apart. And now we're going to get to the cleaning. So I'm going to cut just to get all the tools here so you're not watching me work, but I'm not actually going to do any work. I'm just going to get all. My daughter just said, you said you weren't going to make any camera cuts, and now you've made a bunch. All right, so here's some tools of the trade. These are blow torch tip cleaners. You don't have to have these, but they're commonly used. And for 4-cycle stuff, they work. If and when you start working on 2-cycle stuff like weed eaters and chainsaws, and you get into these style carburetors, some of these are too big and you'll need a different solution. My favorite solution is these aircraft cable style key rings. That kind of creates like a flexible key ring. I cut them open and I take just one strand, and these are stainless steel. They're strong, they don't break down. It's easy to hold, easy to find. Another option is guitar strings. These are a little bit more cumbersome. They're easier to lose. They're harder to hold. Kind of why I like these things, because they're yellow and that. But these work fine. Some people will use a bread bag tie, the little thing that you use on a bread. These are also nice little pipe cleaner brushes for in here. And a lot of times, if you Google like blowtorch tip cleaners, like you'll get this thing together for $5 or $8 or something like that on Amazon. That's a pretty good option. Again, on 2-cycle, every once in a while, all of this will still be too big, and then you have to do the guitar string method. Some wire brushes that are everywhere. These are really cool. These are brass kind of paintbrush style instead of toothbrush style. These can be really useful. And then these are one of my favorite. I found them on Amazon. They're small. They're stainless steel. They fit in a drill, and they fit into a lot of spaces that other things don't. All right, so gasoline makes a very good and economical solvent. I used to use lacquer thinner before I knew better, and that works too, but it's a little bit more expensive. So you can take apart all these pieces, and you can soak them. Not all of them really need soaking. Well, that's really noisy, buddy. But you can let them soak, and basically the longer you let them soak, the softer all the junk will get, and the easier your job will be. But if you don't want to wait, then you won't let them soak. So normally the varnish just chips off of the float itself. It doesn't stick to the plastic real well. So this is really easy to clean. And in the very end, I'll go rinse all of this under a sink. We have an outdoor sink since I do so much of this stuff, but a normal indoor sink works too, of course. And then it comes time to do the cleaning of the components. You can use stainless steel against brass. You won't really damage it. Polly, why don't you do that outside? Would you do that for me outside, please? So you can mount these various brushes in a drill press or just a drill and speed up this process. But there's nothing wrong with doing it manually, and for the sake of camera angles and all that stuff, I'll just do it manually. Okay, go ahead and move it, but take it outside, okay? Yeah, it is super noisy. You're gonna ruin my YouTube video. It's on still, but it's fine. I'm just cleaning something. Go ahead and take it out. So you can do kind of like a stabbing motion. That'll kind of get into all those little grooves. Emulsification tubes normally don't get too gunked up because they're real big here. Go ahead, Polly. Take it out, buddy. Okay. So the side of the emulsification tubes is where this comes in. Polly, just drag it, buddy. Please. Take it outside. All right, so much for cleaning. Okay, so basically you take this and you do that. You know what, buddy? Just do it later. It's too loud, okay? I know. Okay. So then I always just kind of spin this thing. You don't really want to enlarge the holes at all, but you do want to kind of scratch away at them. So something like that. Okay, and you can see there's even like some debris hanging out of there right there. So it's important that all of that gets out. Now, one of these being plugged is not gonna keep the machine from running. But if there's debris here, it can fall and then get into the carb and get back into the main jet. And you also just want things to be nice and clean since you're in here working anyway. So get all the holes, and then I do like to give it a dip, give it another wipe, get in there like that. But the main thing is not the inside or the outside, but the holes. Okay, and you can hold that up to the light like I'm doing now and make sure that they're all clean and clear, and they are. You may also consider just taking a little bit of carb cleaner and spraying it down there and plugging the hole. Nice little flush. Just depends on how dirty they are. Sometimes they're super dirty, sometimes they're not that dirty. Okay, so this is really just a plug. Oh no, that's not true. It's the seat. It's the seat for the solenoid valve. Take that back. Sometimes the main jet is built right into this thing. In this case, the main jet is not built into this, but there are holes and orifices in here that have to be cleaned. And I tell, I kind of tell people, like, you almost want like surgically level clean. I get gasoline trapped under my wedding ring, and then it burns. All right. In this case, I also want to remove this O-ring, being careful not to damage it because I don't have more of this exact style. I at least want to look under there, and since it easily came off, I'll just take it off. So. All right. Hey, Bex, would you bring me the dish soap from out there? Thanks. Okay. So that's okay. Bring it anyway. Thanks. So this is a good example where, a wire brush and a drill can be really helpful. But again, nothing wrong with doing it old school. All right. And then, thanks, love. All right. So let's see. Let me get this footing ring off. Okay. It's kind of funny. If I do a ton of editing, and I kind of don't like the results because they feel, I don't know. There's so many videos you watch where it's like, oh, 3 easy steps, and then you go to do it, and they're like, oh, they didn't even show this. Thanks a lot. So I kind of like the idea of not doing a bunch of editing. But then I also kind of feel bad for the viewer who occasionally hears me talking to my kids or whatever, and then didn't come to the channel for that. But yeah, it's part of my life, so it's not the end of the world if people see that. Okay, so you want to be careful that you don't enlarge these holes. These are technically files, and they have grooves. So if you do this a lot, or more importantly, if you do it like with pressure, then you can really cause issues. Spinning them like this works pretty good because you get a certain amount of agitation without filing. And there is a hole down here through the center. So this whole thing is just really gunked up. So I did some scrubbing. Now we're going to drop it back in there to do some soaking while I work on something else. And sometimes that's how it goes, kind of a combination of both. All right, so this is a really good application for this guy. One of my complaints or criticisms about some YouTube channels and videos is like they say like, okay, now we clean the carburetor bowl, and then they show it clean. And like you kind of, it's like, oh, okay, I'll have to clean the bowl. And it's like, you don't really, when you're watching that video, a lot of times you're in the process of making the decision, am I going to tackle this job on my own? Right? Like you're not watching it step by step on how to do it. You're watching it to figure out, okay, how hard is this? And then when they skip certain parts, it's like, oh, that looks easy. But then it's like, well, it's different when you're doing it. So obviously, you can just skip ahead right now. But I still think there's value in kind of seeing how long it takes someone really to do the whole job who hasn't tried to edit it into a 60-second short, to hit more views or something. So, all right, so we'll let that soak now for a little while too. All right, then we'll take a look at the main jet. Since I have this out, I'll just use this. Main jets can be tricky to clean because you have, you got to get all the way through there, but then you also have kind of like this cupped area where um, it can catch debris. So again, this one you definitely don't want to file. Put no pressure. You can't tell as I move this back and forth, I'm not putting any pressure because you can change the size of the jet and then it changes the way machine runs. Yeah, buddy. Bring it back in. I'll get it later. Okay, and then oftentimes you kind of got to do this stabbing motion to get in there. And again, this is kind of a bit mechanical, a bit chemical, so, scrub it, let it soak, scrub it, let it soak kind of thing. I'll let it soak a little bit more. So inside of this tube is never really problematic, but the outside gets some varnish on it. And it doesn't matter if that varnish stays there, but if it dilutes and then, recollects inside the jet, it can be a problem. So it's also just kind of a practical thing. Like you're here, you got to depart. Why leave debris? Something like this can be useful, although there aren't many big flat spots where you can use it. Most of the time, the shapes of these things make it kind of difficult to get in and do meaningful work. But sometimes in here can be bad. Most of the time, it's not. Okay, and then this is a great application for this guy. This brush might be the most useful. There's very few alternatives to a brush like this for certain applications. Okay. Now, some of you may be thinking that all of this isn't worth it. You could just replace the carburetor. It's totally true. Amazon has really cheap carburetors most of the time. I will say a couple things. Normally, I've used plenty of Amazon carburetors. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I will say the original Walbro or Zama, I don't actually know that company. That's kind of I'm not familiar with them. But the original manufacturer, I'm trying to remember the one, I'm blanking out. They make dirt bike ones. And they made the condensers at Volkswagen when I worked there as an engineer. Anyway, they're one of the most common Japanese ones. The quality of the original carburetor is always way higher than Amazon. So with these brushes, they tend to get all matted up at some point and become less useful. So I try and keep one that hasn't had that too much, so that I can still kind of poke and pry into the corners. So you get like a pack of 6 or something like that. And then kind of the worst type of cleaning is where you just have to kind of stab around in there and break the stuff loose because you can't get a brush in there. Like in the corners is normally where that happens. But then normally once you kind of break it out of there, and then it pops out relatively easily. I'm going to clean this. All right, so not totally done. Getting there though. Yeah, cleaning these areas is sometimes the most frustrating bit of the job. It's also, a little bit up for debate how much trouble this will cause you. If this debris chips off and gets stuck in the main jet, then of course you'll have a big problem. But if it dilutes as a solid into a solvent, then it'll just get sucked up by the engine and burned, and then that's more or less fine. So, and it's hard to know. So I try and get it as clean as I possibly can. And one thing I'll do is, if it's a customer I see regularly or if it's my own machine, I will run the machine for a while and then just drain the bowl one more time, because then some of the stuff that didn't come out easily has come out. And then you can drain the bowl one more time. Even just like the vibrations of the machine will sometimes chip away what's in the corner. So I'm going to call that clean. There's a little bit of discoloration, but what I can see that you probably can't is that it's discoloration. It's not like chunks sitting there. So I'm satisfied with that. And my customer will be too. In fact, might even be watching this video. It's important that your float floats. It's very rare for them not to, but if they don't, you'll have some problems, mainly that the gas will leak all over the floor via the air filter. So keep an eye open for that. All right, this was kind of the most frustrating of all the pieces. So we will, not with that one. Get back in there. Again, be careful not to inadvertently enlarge these holes. That would be super bad. Not quite as bad as doing it to the main jet. Yeah, and then when you push that through, you can see there's all that sludge. Still a lot of sludge, or varnish, or a lot of different names for it. Again, hate to say it, but you're going for surgical level clean. I mean, that right there, all of that will cause lots of problems. And eventually you may get to the point where you can run a whole thing through here like that. That's kind of the best. And you can really get it good. You'd hope, or you'd wish, that just chemicals, just soaking would do the trick, but you almost always need a chemical plus some mechanical. I do have an ultrasonic bath, but they're not as magical as people think. I've done some pretty scientific-y tests in comparison. Cleaning like this, I've let them soak for an hour, then I've cleaned, and it doesn't. They do something, and in some cases, certain applications, they're sort of essential for passageways that you can't get to, but a lot of times they're not quite as magical as people would hope. There are guys who have really expensive ones, like really expensive ones, and they claim that those work really good. I believe them, but I don't think most people are ready to shell out $1,000 for an ultrasonic cleaner that they use to fix a $500 generator. But maybe I'm wrong. I kind of feel like this is boring to watch. I feel like most people aren't watching this right now. Maybe they're skipping ahead, which is fine. Doesn't bother me a bit. Of course, you're missing all of my insightful comments, but that's a little bit up for debate as to their true level of insightfulness. All right, so I think we're getting close here to being acceptably clean. All right, I'm gonna let it soak, but I'm not seeing any debris. All right, this little guy is really tiny. And as I have mentioned a couple times, that's where you need these really fine ones, guitar string type stuff. He doesn't normally get all corroded and nasty, but he does have to be totally and perfectly clean. All right, for this guy, you can use a paper towel. Just very gently make sure he's normally rubber. And normally he's fine. But if you can get that clean, give him a light scrubbing. This thing here is a little bit less. Give it a twist as you do it. And yeah, don't scratch him up. You want him to seal. I'm going to give all this stuff a rinse at the end, if you're wondering. All right, where's my main jet? There's my main jet. Okay. So back to the main jet. Again, if like you're patient and you're not in a rush, let the stuff soak overnight. That helps. But keep in mind, you probably want to soak and then scrub, soak and scrub, kind of do a combination of the two. Oops. Guitar strings are often brass, so you don't have to worry about the filing effect too much. They do have a little kind of a grit to them, so they work good. Not everyone has a guitar and old strings, but if you do, it's a good solution. On this side of the jet, there is like a little tiny cup in there, for lack of a better word, that you really do want to get clean. And you just have to take my word for it that it's clean. Same thing in here. Sometimes debris can collect in there. I did get it out in this case. Okay. All right, the last thing to clean is going to be the solenoid. So I'm going to rinse all this in a sink, soap and water, and then we'll go back to the machine, clean it, and there's one thing, and that is we'll show the reassembly. A lot of times they say reverse disassembly procedures, but we'll just do it in case anyone's wanting that. So we'll start at the top. Carburetor is all clean, soap and water. I have found it is hard to get something surgically level clean without sort of soap and water in the end. And you can spray and you can scrub. There's always a little bit of debris. You really just need, in the end, you really just need a lot of flowing water. All right, so pop that guy back down. Then starting threading that guy in. And basically bottom him out all the way. Don't reef on it. And then bring your screwdriver to the top. You can just rotate it. Okay, and then we'll come out. 1, 2, 3, 4 1/4. Okay. All right, so that's your idle jet, sometimes called your secondary jet. All right, emulsification tube. Normally it only goes in one way, and you'll know you get it right because he pops out there. But he won't pop out there until you put in the main jet. So take your ground down screwdriver. You'll see the brass guy right there, the emulsification tube. And don't reef on it. Don't tighten it. You might have to do this again someday. Okay. Then reinstall the spring onto your fuel inlet needle, and then reinstall him into here. Amazing footage, I know. Oh, one thing I forgot to do, I normally like to spray a little bit of fuel in there. Just make sure it free flows into the bowl. It's a huge opening normally, so it basically never gets plugged up. But there can be a little bit of debris in there. In fact, the first squirt, I saw like just a little bit of brown orange stuff. So, okay, and then drop him into place like that. Take your post. You can clean your post. The post is almost never a problem, but if it is, clean it up. And actually, I just see a little tiny bit of brown debris on there. It's really not so much like, oh, something bad's going to happen. It's more of just good practice to get everything super clean. So, oh yeah, some posts have a flat spot, so they only go in one way. Sometimes there's a flat spot, so it only goes in one way. Other times they go in both. All right, then you got this little guy. Okay. When you go to install the bowl, sometimes you got to think about which way to orient this, because you want to give your customer access to the drain bolt. So that's one thing. I also kind of neglected to clean this properly. So sometimes this is not a super big deal, but sometimes some debris gets built up on there. If you soak this rubber O-ring too long in gasoline, very often it'll swell and then it won't work for you. So consider that. All right. It's nice to work in a cleaner environment than I did. We're out of paper towels. Normally I do everything on white paper towels, try and keep everything organized, clean. A little scatterbrained today. Okay, that's the carburetor rebuilt. Now we'll clean up the on-off. Next thing to do is to clean up, if yours has one of these, to clean up this guy. Pull the O-ring off so that you don't damage that in the process. Try and keep it in this orientation so that debris falls down onto the ground and not into the solenoid to cause some sort of trouble. You want to make sure this thing moves freely. Move it in and out. It's a good application for a little bit of carb spray. You can see some orange fluid coming out of there. Okay. And then be careful of the tip. The tip is rubber. You don't want to destroy that. Okay. All right, so now start putting this thing back together. First thing you're going to want to do is get your orientation. The pipe's going to the right. That's kind of a good hint. And then put him into place. Get your two Allens. So I'm probably not going to do or say anything super helpful at this point. So if you already know how to reassemble, probably a good time to tune out. But I'm going to go all the way through the process. And in case anyone wants to watch the whole way, I may have something interesting to say. I'm not sure. No promises. So snug those up. After you've put those on, you can slide the carburetor back onto the machine. Okay, and then let me actually film it. That would be helpful, probably. All right, so then you can pull this guy and put him in to the hole. And then you can take your little guy here, the little spring. Then you can push him on and into place. You can do your lower fuel hose. Now you may consider draining all of the fuel that's in the tank. Actually, I'm going to drain just a little bit here. Depending on how long it's sat, the fuel might not even really be flammable anymore. This actually looks still clear. I'm not super worried about it. I'm pretty confident that it'll still run on that fuel. Again, strong fingers or some pliers. And then the breather. Make sure that your hose clamp doesn't get in the way of the choke lever. Not a super well thought out clamp type. This might actually be an indicator that somebody has worked on this. Most of the time it's a spring clamp, not one of these screw clamps. Okay, make sure your choke is still working. And then after those things are hooked up, you're ready to start reassembling this big plate. But before you do that, throw your gasket back on. I like to put these screws on first, at least by hand. That's the connection that matters most. The bracket at the bottom is just for support. You don't need it to be airtight or anything like that at the bottom, the way that you do at the top. But also, don't tighten it up so much that then. Sorry, there's my microphone. Don't tighten up so much so that you can't get it in at the bottom. All right, I'm gonna tighten these up. Okay, sorry, this is probably boring footage again. It's just reassembly, and then we'll get it started after this. So. Okay. Oh, this must just be the worst YouTube video to watch right now. So boring. Guy tightens nut. Okay, that's done. Now we got the little 8s to do, and then we'll get it started. So if you're still listening, I hope this is helpful for you. I find it very satisfying to fix things. I hope you do too. And maybe this helped you help someone else or develop a skill. If you are still watching and you didn't like this video, I'm not sure why you're still watching, but let me know by giving me a thumbs down. So you connect this little tube here, and then you connect, let's see, this one like that. It goes in over there. It's a very low pressure situation, so. All right, and then reinstall the air filter. Upside down. Lay a dork. That's what happens when you do stuff. People watching. Okay. Put the choke on. Turn your fuel back on. Turn your ignition back on. And let's see what happens. No camera cuts. All right, so I'm gonna let it run for probably an hour just to get most of the old fuel moving. I'll tell the customer to top it off fully and run it every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful. If not, give it a thumbs down. I will make stuff like this. And in the meantime, God bless. Take care.